that then found and manufactured the Beatles in Britain and brought them into the United States.
Okay, so go into detail about that, because I think that's fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, it was very much, people are probably somewhat more familiar with modern packaging of random like celebrities that are like bubblegum celebrities who are whether Britney Spears or Christina Aguilera, they're on things like the Disney Kids thing. They're selected because they got a certain bit of
Mickey Mouse
and
Club.
charisma, and so they're groomed and then they're marketed like you would market any product. And most of in the case of a lot of these modern singers, their music is not produced by them, but it's attributed to them, and they just have to lip sync or just look charming, sell it, look sexy. And there's a lot of work from the propaganda bureaus, from advertising to shape our psyche to think that these guys are great,
Right.
So it wasn't that different. Like when the Beatles first landed in America, before getting onto the Ed Sullivan Show, I forget which advertising agency was hired by EMI Records to basically pay high school girls to get on buses from school they were driven to the airport. They were paid maybe $20 to then scream like mad for whoever the hell comes out of that plane. And there were photographers, waiting in their positions. And the girls were like, what are we doing here? I don't know. We got the money. Let's go there. Ah! And so on the next days, headlines everywhere across America, it's Beatles mania, otherwise known as the British invasion, right?
Okay.
And so that was the first.
Who called it the British invasion? Like,
they called it the British invasion. That's the official name. I didn't give it that. That's called the British invasion. Because then you had
so accurate.
Yeah, then you had the Rolling Stones, who were a little bit more edgy versions of the Beatles, who got like.
So that's another one, right? That was also
they got a little bit more
manufactured. Do they have any talent?
I don't know. It depends who you ask. But
no, I mean, do they really sing? You said they lip sync.
Oh, in some cases. In some cases they do. In some cases they don't. Like the Beatles sang. They were given training. There was a lot of money poured into like upgrading their skill set when they were the ones selected.
Right.
But then then so everybody was given that idea that we should all cherish and love this new thing. And then the Rolling Stones, they're a little bit more overt in their satanic proclivities with their
I
see a red door and I want to paint it black. That's basically a story. I mean, or Can You Guess My Name? When
I went to see them, I don't know, maybe it was last year, the year before.
Yeah,
I was just watching what they were putting up, and there was like fire and red. I said, man, that's totally satanic.
Yeah.
No,
these guys were partying with people like Kenneth Anger. Kenneth Anger is a devout Satanist, like a follower of Aleister Crowley. They were partying with him. His girls were being sent to their parties. People like Jimmy Savile as well in Britain, who ran the Top of the Pops, who had a massive pedophilia ring for decades, friends with Charles and Prince Philip, and the whole British elite was also very much partying with the Stones.
Right.
So yeah, I mean, they're everywhere you look. I mean, it's a big list. I could go into Knights in Satan's KISS, right? What does KISS stand for? It's Knights in Satan's Service. We act like, oh, it's so charming. Oh, they're just being like cheeky. It's like, no, it's
keep going. This is really interesting. And I think it's really interesting for a lot of people. A lot of people don't know this. Like, my husband's going to go into shock if this ever comes out. You know what I'm saying? Because he loves music and bands and knows all the names and knows all the songs. And, and he would never entertain in him, because even when I told him in a bazillion years that this is real. And I'm wondering, is this ever going to come out? Because so many people are going to go into that cognitive dissonance.
It's not for me, like.
Well, for you, but I'm telling you.
You gotta pick and choose your battles. Like, I think that down the line, maybe in a few generations, human beings will have the emotional maturity to be able to look at this. Right now, we're not there yet. It's too spiritually ingrained. Most people can't deal with this. So I
know, but I still want you to go into the different bands, because
like I'll do it.
I know a few of them. It's still
like somebody
all of us that are awake. It's fascinating.
Shelley Robinson.
You can see all the questions.
I can see the comments. Yeah, like Shelley Robinson said, like, what about the Doors? Well, yeah, that's a good example.
Oh, yeah, that one, yes.
Yeah, like the Doors. Well, Jim Morrison. You can Google this. His father played a very important role in a military intelligence as an admiral overseeing the Gulf of Tonkin incident. So like I was telling you about the Lusitania inside job that got the U.S. into World War I, there was also another inside job called the Gulf of Tonkin incident that never happened.
Right.
Americans were told commie-loving Viet Cong have attacked our naval ship in Vietnam, and so we have to go defend America. And the guy on the main ship that supposedly got attacked and sunk, never happened, was the father of Jim Morrison. And I don't know what the hell they did to Jim Morrison, but it seemed like he was he was a bit of like almost a sacrificial kid. It's something that you kind of almost have to do, it seems, for many people on the upper levels of military, of the establishment, especially if you're in the military intelligence. You could find the same thing with
your oldest is usually sacrificed, right?
Sacrifice means, but there's a variety of things, right? Like in the ancient times, you were doing the Baal worship sacrifice of the kid for either Morlock or something else, but some other variation on Baal, or Baphomet. But in modern times, the sacrifice could mean something different. Like in the case, Jim Morrison died when he was 29 of a drug overdose. He himself was obviously processed through an MK Ultra heavy intensity brainwashing operation. He came out. He went from being like a clean cut kid, to becoming what he became, sputtering off things that baby boomers were all told was like profound poetry. But it's like you actually read what's the lyrics of the songs that he's singing. Read them and think about what is he saying. There's songs in there that involve him talking about killing your family, like going to your sister's room and then going to your brother's room and your mother and father's room and what's he doing? He's talking about how this kid is a psychopath killing members of his family. It's like that's what you're. And it's like Paul McCartney's, bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer went down upon his head. Bang, bang, Maxwell's silver hammer came down until she was dead. And he has this kid named Maxwell, this sociopathic kid who went to school and killed his teacher, killed his date, killed his mom, killed his family. That's a Beatles song. Paul McCartney thought it was the best Beatles song ever. Like, that's crazy.
Do you think they really committed suicide, or are they suicided?
Oh, I'm talking about the character in the song.
No, I know that, but do you think Jim Morrison,
the character who's
right? No,
yeah.
I get that, but horrible. But do you think Jim Morrison really committed suicide, or did he suicide? Was he suicided? Because a lot of them seem to be seeing a lot of these musicians, they're always committing suicide. And I just find that very suspicious.
No, I think it was a drug overdose. I mean, if he was killed, there's no way to know because his drug addiction was so intense that he made it pretty tough.
Okay, yeah, some some have overdoses and some commit suicide.
Yeah, like you could say that maybe they thought it was part of making him into a modern myth. It's harder, if you're young in your prime when you die, and you're such a role model and an idol to so many people, it's more difficult to see you as a mortal. You can be made into an immortal sort of godhead forever in that sense, or for a long time if you die in your prime. So maybe that was the case, and the same thing for there's so many people in the 60s, right?
I know.
So all that to say, the Doors, also the name for the Doors, you know where the name comes from, right?
No.
Aldous Huxley wrote a propaganda manual for the baby boomers, kind of like a Bible for drug addicts, called Doors of Perception, popularizing mescaline and I don't think it was LSD, but psilocybines. Mesc big time though. That was the Aleister Crowley favorite, and so Doors of Perception is like huge, right below Brave New World, and that's where the Doors got their name, was from Aldous Huxley's Doors of Perception. And Aldous Huxley was right down there in California, partying with the Ordo Templi Orientis crowd as well. I think Aldous Huxley was a Satanist. The evidence points to it, at least, and as was his brother Julian. So yeah, Matt, what about the Christian singers? Somebody's asking. Yeah, there's some Christian singers, but I guess the problem I'm seeing is that there's a figure named Marshall McLuhan who said something important, even though he himself is a compromised social engineer, not a good guy. But he said some interesting things. Number one, he had this thesis that the medium is the message in many ways. What does that mean? It means that more important than the content of what you're saying is how you're saying it. So if you're using social media, let's say Twitter, as a mode of communication, then the very act of using Twitter to communicate your thoughts over the course of months of your life or years of your life is going to have more of an important impact on how your mind works, on how it generates ideas, because of the constraints that Twitter creates. You have to limit yourself to, what is it, a certain limited number of characters, right?
Mm-hmm.
And there's something about the entire medium of how people are trained emotionally to react with each other within group dynamics on social media that will cause your mind to move in a certain geometry. And that geometry is more important than any particular thing you think about anything. So when it comes to the Christian singers, I think there's some good ones, but the problem that I find is, or the bigger problem is, that they're using a mode of expression which was created largely by social engineers who wanted to create a banality to our musical tradition by, for example, in the crafting of the Beatles and the crafting of what's called the counterculture, right? So they called it the counterculture revolution. What does that mean? It was a revolution that countered the culture, the thing that gave rise to the greatest explosions of goodness, of freedom movement, of artistic creations from the Renaissance through the American Revolution to the 1960s, was the culture. And then the baby boomers were created to create a counterculture. It was a counterculture revolution. So the culture.
Wow, that word! It just hit me. Cult. Sure.
Yeah, well, I mean, culture is something. Cult. The word cult. It literally just means a field around which multiple people, more than one person, have similar beliefs and ways of feeling about certain things that bring them into communion. That could be good or could be bad. You could say in that sense the early Christians could be said to be a cult, but at the same time, but is it a bad thing? No, because that was a cult that was geared towards the truth of natural law. That's why the empire.
I saw one title. I want you to keep going, but I didn't have a chance to watch it, but you had a title that was absolutely fascinating. But keep going. Keep going into maybe what other bigger band? Like what about
Oh, well, here, let me just finish this. This is a potent thought. It's a potent thought. So if you look at there was a specific set of formulas that were created by those same figures who were organizing MK Ultra. And in 1949, 1950, after World War I, there was something known as the Congress for Cultural Freedom. I got a book that if people are readers, there's a book I highly recommend.
Are any of these on audio? I'm more of an audio than I can listen while I ride my bike versus sitting still.
I think you could probably get this on audio, but it's called The Cultural Cold War by Francis Stoner Saunders. It's a wonderful book. It's called The CIA and the World of Arts and Letters. Very important book to read. And in it goes through the story of how modern culture after World War II was manufactured by the CIA and also MI6. The Congress for Cultural Freedom was the primary conduit to launch this new artistic movement that affected literature, the visual arts, painting, so like music. And the idea, the philosophy behind it was, how do you create a dualized culture? One mass culture for the slaves, that would be a culture of banality, where you use popular melodies that are repeatedly intoned, that have like a baseline repetition, that don't really have a composition that goes anywhere, that doesn't really say anything, that has a very limited time span, usually about 3 to 3.5 minutes. So you reduce people's ability to think and concentrate over a long term by focusing on tiny little emotional charged things. And then have an elite culture for what's called high culture, which would be abstract ugliness, and create a cult of ugliness for the elites. Abstract paintings, contemporary paintings, atonal music. If you listen to atonal music go to YouTube, type atonal music. It's ugly. you have to try to listen to it without your ears bleeding, because it's offensive to the soul.
Wow.
But if you want to be a respected member of the upper elite clubs, you have to like it. You have to put abstract paintings on the walls of your of your office space. If you're a CEO in a $1 billion corporation, you have to have that. So it's like it's a cult of ugliness that destroys the human sentiments, the natural human sentiments that involve love, compassion, like all these natural emotions that babies have. That has to be crushed. And so the elites are allowed to have that. They're allowed to have the classical culture for the elites is permitted only if it's within the packaging of an overall cult of ugliness.
Wow.
For the masses who are expected to be plebeian slaves, they have to like banality, right? They can't access those powers of the mind that you could get. If any, because what the oligarchy was trying to do was to try to destroy our ability to appreciate, love the cultural of people like Johann Sebastian Bach or Mozart or Beethoven or Schumann or Schubert or the great compositions of the ages that were sometimes 45, 50, 60 minutes for a symphony. That requires, for one song, it requires the mind be exercised so that you're thinking about what happened 20 minutes ago, such that what's happening now is the music itself is going somewhere. It's taking me somewhere. It's not, there are melodies, there are themes, motifs, but they're not repeating in some linear way. They're transforming. There's like a pipeline. And so listen to Mozart's Requiem to get a sense of that. So people should take, after this time this week, take note of this Mozart Requiem, right? And just listen to it. Just enjoy it. It's like 14 small movements that are all tied together for a greater whole. It's very divine. It's transformative. And Mozart was writing this when he knew that he had been poisoned and he was about to die. That was like one of his last testaments, and he saw each piece as a prayer to God. So did Bach.
Wow.
So
is that why they killed him? Is that why they killed him?
He was part, yeah, yes and no. I mean, because he was doing what you were not supposed to do in Vienna during the time of the American Revolution. You know, he was living and composing in the 1770s, 80s, 90s. He was part of a movement organized by Benjamin Franklin in Europe that were trying to uplift and ennoble the culture to become capable of self-government. So the idea of the arts that he was participating in, including his operas as well, were designed to enrich and create a noble citizenry that could fully appreciate their internal beauty and express and also appreciate the external beauty at the same time outside of them, and thus not be degraded so easily to a status of a slave. So he was part of a big movement of artists of that time who were fighting, yeah. And there's an interesting fight as well within the lodges, because you had different Masonic lodges. You know, he was part of a grouping of lodges in Vienna that was at war with the Satanists. So you had the Satanists and the humanists, the classical Christian Renaissance humanists, utilizing the instrument of various lodges, but doing battle with each other. And unfortunately, by the end of the Napoleonic Wars, the moral revolutionaries were purged from all the law. I see no evidence that any of them continued to exist after 1815 in Europe, at least. Wow. And they were either poisoned, killed, had their heads cut off in the French Revolution or other things. Wow. There were still some residues in America that continued on into the 19th century, maybe the beginning of the 20th, but I don't see much evidence that, because the Scottish Rite took over most of the lodges. There were literally something like 80 or 90 different little lodges of different little Masonic groups in America in the 18th century. But then by the 19th century, the end of the 19th, it was principally only the Scottish Rite that took over control completely. And they were always controlled by the hardcore Satanists of England. And yeah, it's unfortunate. But all that to say, yeah, Mozart was at the vanguard of this artistic revolution. And that's what the counterculture revolution of the Cold War period was designed to crush, was an appreciation for that.
Wow.
Yeah.
So I had heard that and this, I don't know if this is true, that every hit song came from a lullaby. The melody originated in a lullaby. So this was why people were so hooked in, and they became such a hit song.
There's some truth to that, but at the same, no, I mean, there's some truth because there are examples where that's the case. But what often you'll find is that, like even Elvis, in the 50s, had used and many rock and roll songs. I'm having trouble thinking of examples concretely, but I know that this is true. Would use motifs that would arise in classical musical compositions, but they would then simply extract the motif and then simply make that the repetitive like sort of theme that wouldn't end up going anywhere. Whereas when you looked at it within the 20 or 30-minute original piece that they extracted it from, it was part of a broader composition that was going somewhere. It was taking your mind in a direction.
Okay.
But despite that, the melodies, the chords, the four, there's like four principal chords around which all music from the 50s, 60s to the present day are all based on the same four chords as a baseline. It's like a mathematical formula that they've been using and reusing in every domain, from R&B, pop, rock and roll, rap, even some metal cases. Not as much metal, but even some metal. But it's the same four chords, and people can even go to YouTube and Google like four chords popular music. That should probably on YouTube get you some samples that people have done, just showing you like hundreds of these songs that just. So it's formula. It's all based on a simple, banal formula, masquerading as novelty. So everybody just wants novelty. It's a cult of interesting, but it's not actually improving, transformative, the way true art should be if it's going to create a real citizenry.
Were Masons a corrupt organization back then?
Back when?
I guess she's probably talking about back when. Were they always bad? I guess is what she's asking. Were the Masons always bad? Were they always satanic? Were they always what we're seeing today?
Well, Friedrich Schiller wrote a really good. He delivered a lecture in 1791. Friedrich Schiller is a poet in Germany, part of the Ben Franklin networks, along with Mozart and later on Beethoven. He died in 1804, again, very young age, probably assassinated. He had the symptoms, at least, of poisoning. And anyway, he was the founder of a school. It was a science of universal history. He founded a science of universal history, a way of studying history that made it a science. And in one of his lectures, it's called On the Mission of Moses. It was transcribed by one of his students. He develops a good, I find it a very persuasive hypothesis of the origins of Masonry from Egypt, that he posits had been corrupted but had a good origin. I'm not going to do justice to his line of reasoning, but he also posits that Moses would have likely, having been adopted by a noble family, a girl who was from a noble line, would have gone through what was customary of children of nobles of Egypt, which was to go through certain rites of initiation in the mysteries. And the time that Moses lived was about 1100 BC or so. That was a time a little bit after Akhenaten. Akhenaten was a major reformer pharaoh, right? There's very little known about him today, but he was the monotheistic pharaoh. So Akhenaten was the pharaoh that abolished all the gods, the polytheistic gods of Egypt, made a lot of enemies, and tried to move the capital from Cairo. I forget where, but it lasted for only about 20 years. And his corrupt son, Tutankhamun, tried to basically erase all of the work that his father had done to reform the Egyptian system. Also, it was during Akhenaten's reign that you had this revolution in arts. So the Egyptian art goes from very flat, symbolic representation of things to becoming very naturalistic, almost Renaissance quality. Like it's amazing, the naturalism of the arts that are standardized during his reign. So it's a very interesting time. And he doesn't portray himself as a perfect being or a deity of perfect form. He wants himself to be portrayed as he is, as sort of like, somebody with a pot belly stomach and an elongated face, and very interesting character. Yeah, he tells me that there's probably something moral to him. But you know,
So none of
Moses,
those apps that make you thinner and your face, it's,
yeah, he didn't use those apps. No.
he didn't care to fix himself out of an app. Yeah.
Yeah, and if he had one, he probably wouldn't have used it. Probably, but
Right.
yeah. So Moses would have come into his educational experience within the early Masonic schools, which I mean, Schiller goes through his hypothesis of the idea of like why the rites of initiation would have been required originally, which he says, you know, you're coming from a world that only knew polytheism, like the idea of multiple gods, multiple causality, not one unifying principle. That was very foreign for most people's minds. So to be able to prepare the mind for such a heresy would have required, you know, creating an emotional climate for that person to experience an epiphany where they could then rise to a position of discovery. You know, and Schiller says that, you know, by this time, two or three centuries after Akhenaten, there would have been a slide towards corruption. Probably more degrees of initiation might have been created for the purpose of control and, you know, keeping people more separated from the discovery that there is only one God. You know, which the Egyptians would have been the first to discover, because the Egyptians, especially when you look at the early pyramids, the earliest like Khofru or the Pyramid of Giza, if you look at their geometry, these are astronomical observatories. They're synced up so that when you're in the King's Chamber or the Queen's Chamber looking through the little, they're perfectly aligned to Sirius and to, I forget the other star system, but they're done in such a manner that they're used around the golden section. They're designed to be able to better measure the longer term cycles, like the precession of the equinox. So they're observatories that, you know, you can only imagine that an early person living in that culture, looking at the night sky, which looks chaotic, of stars without rhyme or reason, would finally realize, oh, there are these unifying simple principles that can be discovered of the 26,000 year precession there, of the other cycles that we can know. So the original pyramids had no hieroglyphs, no signs of superstition. They're very much organized in this way. So the idea of a unifying God, one God, would have been something that only a few would have discovered early on, because not every, you can't, they would cut your head off. You know, you'd have peasants at your house with pitchforks if you were trying to say all of a sudden, like Akhenaten did, hey, by the way, there's only one God. We're all wrong. No, that's not going to last. That's why he got killed. So Moses would have had to find a way to take his abused, enslaved people, because he was he was Jew, right? And to figure out a way to give them after 400 years of enslavement, how do you give this degraded people a sense of dignity that they would want to fight for their freedom? That's hard to do. And you know, it seems like the Egyptian gods are so much more powerful than El Shaddai, the god of the Jews. So he had to, after, you know, taking the time he took, he had to figure out, how do I take what I know and then bring it back in a way that will be received by my people in a manner that they will get the courage to stand up to Pharaoh and leave and demand freedom. So again, like, Schiller has this whole beautiful hypothesis about how that system had good roots, but then became corrupted by those who sought to use the hierarchy for the creation of an elite.
So is this why they say what's come out that Washington was a Mason, a Freemason?
Oh yeah.
And so of course, when you hear that, we know the Masons are bad, right? Today anyway. But you're talking, it was the original.
Yeah, like there's a lot of evidence I've seen that you had those who were using Masonic lodges for the purpose of trying to restore the sense that human beings are made in the image of a loving God, and they were using the lodge system as a way to send secret communications across large distances, which you had to do if you were organizing. Like, America was the result of an international conspiracy for the good. It required people working in Russia, in India, in the Mysore southern India zone, that were working, sending letters to the Continental Congress. In Morocco, you had Emperor Sidi Muhammad of Morocco, who was working with the American revolutionaries. Morocco was the first country, Islamic Morocco, to recognize America as an independent republic in 1777 December. That required a lot of organization on top of the Irish, the German, the Prussian, the French, Republicans working with Franklin. So to do that, when the shipping lanes were so controlled, maritime shipping was so controlled by the British Empire that it was too risky to send mail and other forms of communications on official mail. I mean, everything was going to be read. You were going to destroy your collaborators easily by having an interception of your letters, of your messaging. So yeah, you could use things like code. Coded messages were useful, but even that was limited because you could code break. So the Masonic Lodge system provided an alternative conduit for communications across various distances.
Interesting.
You had lodges like the Society for the Cincinnati Lodge in America, which a lot of the American patriots and their kids and grandkids were members of. Unfortunately, that seems to have gotten really corrupted by the 20th century. But originally, that was a very, very important conduit. And then you had the evil Satanists who were also using lodges, but they represented a very different idea of, an evil god, that we are in an evil Luciferian god's image and had to serve a very different.
Did these lodges have different names, or were they all like Freemasons?
Oh, no. There's so many different lodges and large charters. Each lodge has their own charter.
People know what the differences were? Like, okay, that's a satanic one, or that's a,
Yeah, well, like one obvious one that got its start in the early 1700s in Britain, and then immediately had little branches open up in the colonies of America, was the Hellfire Club Lodge. So the name kind of gave it away, right?
To figure out, yeah.
Yeah, that was what Benjamin Franklin was originally assigned by Cotton Mather to infiltrate, because his older brother, his eldest brother, James Franklin, he had a printing press, which was very influential, because if you control a printing press, you control the minds of people, right? So his brother James, upon returning from a trip to London, was inducted into the Hellfire Club and set up a Hellfire Club chapter in Massachusetts, or was it Philadelphia? I'm forgetting now. I want to say
this might be why. So this might be why, some people think some of the good people were bad, because they were infiltrating.
Well, some were infiltrating. Like in the case of Ben Franklin, he was infiltrating into his. That's why he got the job as a junior sort of sweeper and like assistant to his brother at the printing place, was to like spy on behalf of Cotton Mather and John Winthrop Jr., who was still old but very active in the intelligentsia. But then also when he went to Britain, he got counterintelligence. So he was able to then use his connection to his brother to go in the 1720s into London, where he was able to provide that type of counter, because that's part of real world politics is counterintelligence. And so he was able to then get that information of what the oligarchy is doing back to the patriots in America that were training him, that he, so he's part of a continuity. But then also you had lodges that, like you said, there were literally well over 80 different lodges under different Masonic like orders, different charters, different orders. Some were Grand Orient. There was like several different variants of French Grand Orient lodges. The British United Grand Lodge is, as far as I could see, it's only been bad. I don't know of a time or any examples where anything good ever came out of it. And it seems to be the mother lodge for the Scottish Rite that was created by a British general in Charleston, Carolina, Augustine Prevost.
Does that mean this hospital is bad? Is that the same Scottish Rite that has a hospital? I wonder, Joanne McBride says.
Well, are you thinking of the Knights Hospitalier, or are you thinking about the Shriners, or are you thinking about something else?
Well, we have hospitals called Scottish Rite hospitals.
Oh, you do? Yeah, probably. I would be surprised if that was a coincidence.
Yeah. So 13 presidents were Masons doesn't mean they were bad.
No.
It means that they were part of the good Masons, I guess, right?
Well, some of them might have been bad. You gotta always go case by case.
When I said that, I really thought about that also. We do have a lot of bad presidents.
Yeah, I would say most American presidents.
It depends which Mason lodge they were from. So
yeah, and what they were doing. So the first thing to always ask is, what are they doing? Like, for example, here's one strange outlier that I've encountered in my research is that. So there's two Scottish Rites. There's the Southern Scottish Rite and the Northern Scottish Rite. The Southern Scottish Rite is, I've never seen anything anti-evil come out of that at all. Everything's been pretty consistent in all of my research going back to 1801 when it was created.
Anti-evil, you mean it?
Like nothing good. Sorry, nothing good ever came out of it.
Nothing good. Okay.
Sorry, yeah, I should just say it like that. Yeah. Whereas in the case of the Northern Rite, there are weird outliers that will arise occasionally, but I say only occasionally, of certain good people who will be disruptive to imperial designs. One example is the case of Franklin Roosevelt. Okay, he's somebody who was he was born into an elite family. Both the Delanos and the Roosevelts were two branches of two elite families in America. Both of them had a lot of bad, especially the Delano family. They were up to their eyeballs in opium money going back to the 1820s, right? So Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a lot, kind of like John F. Kennedy. There was a lot expected of him to perform a certain way, as all good establishment young boys are expected to be.
In other words, bad.
Huh?
Carry out bad stuff. They were expected to carry out bad stuff.
To carry out some bad stuff, yes. Now, Roosevelt was somebody who fortunately had some very good mentors. He loved his great-grandfather was Isaac Roosevelt, who was a great American patriot, a leader of the American Revolution, who worked very closely with Alexander Hamilton. And he was somebody who Roosevelt studied very deeply. And I've read Roosevelt's university master's. He wrote a final paper for his master's degree on he didn't call it the deep state, but it was effectively a history of the deep state operations in America and the assassination of Hamilton, how it was carried out. It's a very good paper for a young guy who's maybe 17, 18 years old, extraordinarily insightful. So he had a good grasp of it, and he was a patriot. But despite that, within a matter of like literally 4 months, he was brought in from the first degree of the Scottish Rite New York branch all the way up to 33rd degree in like 4 months. Okay.
Wow.
Like super like fast track. Edgar Hoover, who was overseeing 8 presidencies, like J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the FBI. This guy was such an evil slave who wanted to be evil so badly. He wanted to be powerful. He wanted to all these things. It took him 40 plus years to reach the 33rd degree, right? He finally got it. It was like the best time of his life. He had a heart on and everything. Like it was like, but it took him, he only got that in like 1960 at the end of his life. And so what's going on? Well, it's what's in your heart. So Hoover always wanted to be a house slave, right? The sort of like slave of slaves, the handler, the manager of the slaves. That's always what he wanted as his life's ambition. Roosevelt was already born into a family that was an establishment family. For Roosevelt, he didn't have like ambition to be a slave of anything. But those who expected to be his controllers wanted to put their branding on him. It's kind of like inviting Donald Trump to Davos, saying, "Hey, Trump, come to Davos. You know, you're one of us, right?" And like Trump's like, "No, I'm just here. I'm just here to make some business connections. Like, fucking back off." Like, no, you're one of us. You're having a cigar. And so, but they want to put their branding on you, you know? So that's the sense that I get with Franklin Roosevelt, who's, again, a funny case, like he's an outlier, because you look at what he did politically and economically throughout his career as a politician, and especially after he gets polio, which is probably in hindsight a vaccine injury, but you can't say that. But he goes to war with the City of London and Wall Street starting in 1932, and he continues that fight until the day he's murdered in 1945. And so he's just so consistently solid that it shows you that just you can't be guilty by association. And a lot of people in our desire to have like like the final crystal answer, we want to see like, okay, we make some pattern association.
I know. Yeah, exactly. And that's
I guess
that's what I'm getting at. You know,
Yeah.
it's like when I was hearing you on another interview you did, you were talking about, okay, Davos was really like business connection networking thing. And haven't we seen Ivanka in some of those pictures? And so people are like, oh, look, she was there, so she's bad. But we have
Yeah.
two things. We have infiltration and spying, right?
Yeah.
Just like DEA agents in many cases.
Yeah.
And then we think Davos is all bad. So yeah, that's happened a lot. People will send, oh, this pattern of this shirt is satanic. And I'm going, it's just circles. You know, like what's wrong? I might even have that pattern in my closet. You know what I'm saying? People are gonna
Yeah.
think I'm satanic because I got these little round things on my, you know.
I bought a little owl at a garage sale because I thought it was a cute owl. It was well done. I put it on my bookshelf for a while. I had to take it off because every week I was getting people writing me saying, "Aha, you're a Morlock worshiper. I knew it." And I'm like, "Oh, come on, guys! It's just a ceramic
Yeah,
owl." Like,
yeah, yeah.
yeah,
Well, unfortunately, you know, you do have to be careful with some of it, you know. Like I was thinking for a while, I was going like this, and I went, oh my God, they're gonna think I'm doing horns. You know, and I'm starting going, well, be careful what I'm doing with my hands, you know. It's like you're gonna,
yeah,
you know, it's gone overboard. It's like now we can't even see anything. And I think that the moral is we have to keep seeing it in several different places to really know for sure, instead of one little thing. And maybe
yeah.
it
No,
really
exactly.
needs to be like a lesson to all of us.
Yeah, yeah. You want to always tune your mind to look at context in which that's shaping this triangle. Is the context of the triangle like what it's like a Shakespeare play, right? Like if you want to know, I could pull something out like a rose by any other name would smell as sweet. Okay, by itself, that's a cute little thing, kind of charming that I just said that. What the hell am I talking about? What's Shakespeare talking about? Well, you could look at the stanza in which that line takes place within Romeo and Juliet and get a certain better idea, but that stanza is still out of context unless you look at, well, what's the entire scene that stanza is a part of, and you're like, okay, that gives me a better idea, but why the hell is this guy in love with this girl? What's going on? Why can't he have her? Why can't she have him? And then so you look at the act and you're like, okay, now the act sets a better context for this particular scene. That's a series of scenes within an act, but that act, there's 4 acts in the play. So again, you got to like start with the whole, right? And then let your mind know as much as it can about the context of the whole process
Right.
in which this thing is occurring, this triangle or this symbol or this set of words. Somebody says the word sustainability, right? Like Russia, China, Hungary, Biden will say the word sustainability is good. Do they all mean the same thing just because they're using the same word? No, they don't. They mean very different things, because if you look at what the priorities are of a lot of these Asian countries or African countries that are saying the word, they're talking about sustained growth. Like they're talking about using coal, using oil, using hydroelectricity, using nuclear, using everything to sustain your growth so that you can end hunger and poverty. Whereas when you have a technocratic psychopath in the West using the same word, they're talking about windmills, solar panels, carbon emission quota constraints that are going to kill you, because ultimately they when they say sustainability, they mean kill people and make the world green. One
thing,
yeah.
when you say solar panels, we also know solar panels can be good for energy, right? For ourselves, for our own homes.
Yeah, for our homes, yeah. Residential, yes, but only residential.
Not in solar panels like,
yeah.
Or otherwise we have the situation we had in Texas where everything froze on purpose, of course.
Yeah.
Fake snow. It was all very shiny and it burned with fire. Yeah. Exactly. And so when we had a friend who sat there and they were like, oh, we put snow in our mouth. I'm like, you just put chemicals in your mouth. Yeah. I hope you spit that out. Well, it did taste strange. Yeah, it's not real snow. They're trying to kill us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you got it. So, or the word green is another one, right?
Yeah.
Two people could say they like green. I like green, but like India is greening deserts. China is greening deserts. They're moving bulk water from areas that flood too much into areas that are Gobi Desert that don't have enough water. And along the way, they're reforesting and they're greening.
Wow.
Which that's the right way of being green. Whereas the greenies of America are spreading solar panels over deserts. They're destroying dams to liberate deserts because they're saying, oh, the deserts should be free of the constraints caused by hydroelectric dams. So Gavin Newsom is spending $500 billion to demolish 4 high-quality dams, creating scarcity, but increasing desert now because there won't be any reservoirs anymore. The farmers are going to be destroyed. Abundant affordable electricity is going to be gone. But now that you've spread solar panels across the desert, that is going to increase the heat of the desert by a factor of 3 to 6 degrees. Now that heating is going to cause more desert. You're going to kill more areas that should have had life, right?
That's like when Lula created, Bolsonaro created a reservoir for people that didn't have water, and Lula, of course, removed that right off as soon as he was president, as soon as he stole the presidency, of course,
Yep.
It was a good thing.
Yep. Reservoirs are good. Green. But so that's the thing, right?
So you did this. Okay. So you were talking about this is unbelievable. We're going to have to do this talk about this next time you're on. Was Jesus an initiate of an illusion drug cult? I haven't even watched it yet, but I'm going, oh my God, what a title.
Yeah, the answer is no, he wasn't.
So what are you going like? Are you like answering some questions in that, or
the person who's interviewing me, because that's a big thing right now. So there's a big rewriting of our history to make it appear as though Jesus was either an alien or a mix of an alien and a paranormal being from another dimension, or somebody who had access
to cultist.
Yeah, a leader of a cult who had access to drugs, and that's how he recruited his followers, was by giving them different forms of early LSD or something that they were doing within something.
I hadn't even heard that.
Yeah, it's a thing. Joe Rogan's promoting it. Graham Hancock's a big promoter of this thing.
Joe Rogan's promoting that belief system?
Yeah, he's inviting all sorts of people. There's several people he's had on who are all promoters of this, who he's given an open platform to, saying.
So why would he do that?
Because he's stupid. He's a fake intellectual he's been profiled, and I mean, I think he's been through a lot of intelligence operations because he's such an influencer.
Is he a controlled op? Is he controlled op? Do you think?
He doesn't know it. I mean, he's a very sympathetic guy. I like him as a person. But yeah, I mean, he's had his worldview. There's been a lot of effort that's gone into shaping and sculpting his worldview in a certain direction, especially around the drug issue. Drugs is a new gateway to spirituality and aliens. All of this stuff is a big promoter of that.
Who's been molding that? Who's been molding his thinking?
I think it's probably a number of people who you could find have been encouraging him to bring on certain types of guests. I don't know who's exactly giving him his personal advice when he picks up the phone, or who are his personal advisors off the camera. I don't fully know, but I could just see based as the consequence of his decision making, like now compared to, let's say, 10 years ago, I see a consistent shift.
So my question is, was he groomed to be personality, or so he just actually naturally happened and really did start the show? That's, I guess, that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, no, I think he's just a critically thinking guy who doesn't have a super strong. He's not that epistemologically developed, but he's got a good critical tone about him, and he's got a very humble quality. Those
so he's being honest. So he's not like a musician being groomed to influence us. He actually is really natural, and created his own platform and all that, made his popularity, and so now he's kind of moving in a direction because he's being pushed into that direction in a way.
Yeah, I think there's probably been a certain psychological profiling of him. Certain weak spots were identified, capitalized upon, and have been worked on to the point that he's come out saying that
got
like
really loud just now. Let me see if I did something. Yeah, I did. Wait, what the heck? Okay, I got on my keyboard and it just went, so I hit the volume.
Yeah, no, I mean, he's bringing on like a lot of mainstream neuroscientists.
Okay.